feel like we as artists, our tools have to be updated. We're behind. The world is kind of waiting for, who is it that said, always know? Someone said that, someone really smart, some dead poet. But that only the poets know. And it's like, it's time for us to update our tools because chickens are being cloned and legislation is being written. But we still haven't figured out how to write stories, enough stories that evolve us into the next frontier of human connection.
Come on in, please and thank you. Let's give them a warm I did it on purpose. I know. Yay, yes, we're all getting ready. All right, everyone, thank you all so much for joining us. So I would love to introduce our esteemed panelists, these amazing artists. First up, we have Stevie Walker-Webb, acclaimed Tony-nominated director of Ain't No Mo, newly appointed artistic director of Baltimore Center Stage, actor, activist, and director of Fat Ham with the Huntington Theater, and co-produced the Front Porch Arts Collective and Alliance Theater. Panelists, we have Regine Vital, theater artist, educator, and actor, Shakespeare Project associate producer. And last but certainly not least, and also my boss, Simmons, associate director of Fat Ham and co-producing director of the Front Porch Arts Collective. So much for joining us. The way this panel is going to work, we'll spend the first 45, 50-ish minutes with some questions that I've curated to ask our panelists, and we'll have a little combo, and then we'll leave the last half hour open to you all to ask us any questions that you may have. So let's jump in. So I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about how you got to your theater journey today, and especially with the plays that you're working on, why these plays, why now? Mr. Director, if you want to start, you could. Or anyone could start. So yes, what's your journey been to this moment, and why this play, why now?
Let's play a game. Let's make sure everyone's ears are turned on, so we'll go all. When I say yes, you say no. Yes, yes, yes.
No, no, no.
When I say no, you say yes. No, no, no.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
No, no, no.
No, yes, no.
Yes, no, yes.
When I say up, you say down. Up, up, up.
Down, down, down.
When I say down, you say up. Up, up, up.
Down, down, down.
Down, down, down.
Up.
Up, down, no.
Down, down, yes.
I grew up in Waco, Texas, in a small school. At that time, it was really small city. It's like a slightly larger city. It's still pretty small. It's in a part of the neighborhood where there was limited access to the arts.
Speak louder.
Sure, absolutely. I can move this too. Is that better? Is that better? Okay. But in a part of the community where there was limited access to the arts, I grew up. I always talk about being a welfare activist, growing up without access to things that people who have more economic means get access to. But my community, the people who made up my community, had a wealth of story inside of them, had a wealth of art inside of them, but they just didn't have a place to kind of share that or give that. I like to tell people that the first proscenium arts that I ever experienced was in elementary school in kindergarten. My mom had bused me and my with 6 children, and she had like a green Astro van, the one with the sliding door. And so it did kind of feel like she was busing us to a different neighborhood. She borrowed an address. She said borrow, I said stole. But she changed our zip code so that we could have access to a slightly better school district. And my siblings before me were going along and they were doing great. And then when it was my turn, I just was bouncing off of the walls. And the teachers were like, this kid is not from this neighborhood. And they were like, we got to figure out something to do with him. And they suggested that I be put on Ritalin. And my mom was like, no, we can't afford it. And two, it's just, I don't know what that is. And at the time, she was selling refrigerators at Sears on commission, just to like, kind of let you know how bad things were. You don't buy refrigerators every day. And so she got this notion. She was like, I'm going to take this refrigerator box and put it over your desk. And the teacher was like, what? And she convinced my kindergarten teacher to say yes. And so on a Saturday morning, she took my desk and she pushed it all the way into the back of the class, and she cut out a refrigerator box and put my desk inside. And I could do whatever I wanted as long as I didn't disturb others. I could color in that on the walls of my refrigerator box. I had a teddy bear. I had snacks. We didn't have a lot of resources, but my mom was resourceful. So I became a visual artist in like kindergarten. I was like, whenever I was bored, I like got stumped by a math problem, I would just stand up and start like illustrating on the interior walls of that box. And I began to see the world through a proscenium from that moment. And my mom just knew that I was spatial. She knew that I was an artist. And I credit that refrigerator box with my being a director. But that's kind of how I met the theater that I'm talking about.
You don't hear him very well.
I can't go anymore.
Yeah, okay.
The way I have it go.
I love this story. Mine's not as interesting, if I'm perfectly honest about it. I ended up in the theater in some ways by accident. I guess my training is more academic and literary than it is dramatic or artistic. But I had no idea what to do with any of that. I graduated from undergrad and was like, I don't know what to do. I also need a break. So I'm going to take a break. And of course, because I love being in a classroom, about a year after college, and I promised myself to get 2 years off because I went straight to college. I was overachiever in high school, like had a bit of a rocky time in undergrad, but I just kept going. There was no stop. And I'd done some theater in high school, so that my theater sort of background, if I had any, was drama club and some community theater. And I was like, no, you promised yourself 2 years off before you have to figure it out because you need a break. Like I was definition of burnt out. And what happened about a year and a half after I graduated was I got the itch to be back in a classroom again. And so I just started taking classes. I went to BU and I was like, well, BU will let me take some classes for like at a discount. I think I could like $50 a credit or whatever. And because I somehow managed to get through my English degree without taking Shakespeare, I said, let me take a Shakespeare class. Up until then, I was like, absolutely not, I hate this stuff. I read Hamlet in high school and was like, never again. It was absolutely ruined for me. And the bits of Shakespeare that I did do in my like work in English lit while I was in college, it was because like it was in like survey classes or like a random thought that I had. I was like, let me do this for this project that I'm doing in my history class. And for whatever reason, my professor was like, sure, why not? But I actually hadn't studied it, and so I went back and just took like, it was like a 300 level course. It was mostly CFA students who were in my class, College of Fine Arts students, who were required to take a literary Shakespeare course. So they were just like, we have to be here. And I'm like, this is great. How did I not do this when I had to? Like, how did I forget to not do this? And the reason why it was great for me was because all the things that I thought I wanted to do, that I was like, you have to choose, in theater, I didn't have to choose. And specifically in Shakespeare, because I just wanted to be in the classroom and talk about things and be an academic, I could talk about all the things. I could talk about philosophy, I could talk about random historical facts that, they weren't true, but then I could go find out the truth, right? Like, there's like random bits of, it's like bad French, and all of a sudden I found myself defending French. My family's from Haiti, you don't defend the French. But every time someone would say, Jake me, so paroles, I was like, okay, I need to figure out, and so all of a sudden I had this like, essentially a playground where I could talk and think about and just kind of wax philosophical and poetic and political about anything and everything that I wanted to. And then, of course, because I was dealing with dramatic text, the bug to get back on stage came back. And I remember a friend of mine sending me, it was a community theater production of Doubt. Patrick something Shanley Stout, I forget.
John Patrick.
John Patrick Shanley Stout. If you know the film, Viola Davis was in the film. It's the one black role. They couldn't find a black actor. And my friend like sends me this email. You've been saying for years you want to get back in the theater. They are still looking for this role. Go audition. And I auditioned for it, and I got it, and I haven't looked back since. So all of a sudden I was like, yeah, that's who I am. And that's how I got here, essentially. Yeah.
So for me, long-ish, I'll try to shorten it, circuitous route. My mother was one of those people who she wanted well-rounded children, so she would take us, and when I say well-rounded, it was everything from, we saw the Scottish play in like a burnt-out library when I was like a little kid, to Night of the Living Dead. I'm not even kidding, right? Like 9 years old for Halloween. She's like, it's fine. If you look at my brother and I now, we're like, yeah, it's totally fine. It's so weird. But right, like, I mean, she filled us with so much art, but also was the kind of person who's like, I also want a dancer, and so she sent me to dance class. And so I think the first, my first entry into storytelling was through the body and through movement. And I thought I was going to be a dancer, but like while I was in high school, and then I really started to learn this in college, right? I would listen to the kids at drama club. I would watch I would go and watch my friends do debate, and I was always like, I can say that better. I have a better line for you. Come see me. And as I was in college, I would, my papers, any paper that I had to give was a lot more conversational, and my English professor was like, you should take a creative writing course. You need to be doing this. And that led me to playwriting courses, which then led me to BU. I went there for playwriting, and that's what I thought I was gonna do. Like, I thought I was gonna write for TV, and then that was gonna be how I made my money, and then I would do theater for passion. And that changed, where it was actually all theater all the time. But I went to school, I went to grad school for playwriting, and while I was there as a work study, I started to sit behind directors. I did everything from ASMing to, I was running sound. I had no business running sound. They're like, we need you to do this in this tiny theater. And that theater also became then my training ground of how do you produce? And sitting behind directors, I think it was a similar impulse of I can write this better. I can stage it better. I have ideas. Can we do my ideas? Thank you for sometimes doing my ideas. So grateful. But that was it. It was just the sort of I want to know everything about this art form. And even as a little kid, live theater was the most fun. Dance was the most fun. Anything that we could do where we had this kind of exchange was the thing that really got me excited. So even though I thought I was going to do film or TV, it was this was the place where I feel the most alive, where I feel people most alive, where I have that kind of connection. And so with theater, there's also, I've run a small company, I've been an administrator for forever, I teach, I do all of those things, but it all came through, I would say, spending time at Boston Playwrights Theater, where they were like, we don't have enough hands, and I was like, I will be all the hands. And then tried to do that everywhere I could until people were like, let's give you a shot. And it was a 10-minute play here, a 1-act there, a small fringe there. My good friend Nora Long, who some of you may know, was hornswoggled me into starting my first company. It was like, let's start a theater company. Why would we ever do that? And now here I am, company number 2, sitting with you making people.
I love hearing this because I think it's so important for people to just see the different ways that brings people to theater. Because I think there seems to be a misconception oh, you took a class when you were younger and it's always been, or you come from people who do theater, and I think it's so important to see how all of our paths can be so different and yet bring us together in this moment. So shifting gears to these plays, Fat Ham, Taming of the Shrew, 2 iconic Shakespeare plays, I think that a lot of people know about, or at least have heard the titles. Talk to me about how these productions are different. How are they embracing the familiar story of Shakespeare and turning it on its head, and or through a different lens that we've been kind of talking about a little bit, the black lens, if you will.
Since we're on the stage, Taming of the Shrew, Taming is one of those plays that's kind of in this conversation that's been going on for a while, and it's definitely going on in Shakespeare circles, and I feel like it's going on in theatrical circles a lot more as well. Should we stop producing it? Because on its face, it is basically the story of domestic abuse and called a comedy. And I could go into all the discipline reasons why, okay, let's stop and think about the period and how there was such a genre as a Shrew play, right? There are at least 3 Shrew plays that we know of. And this one might be either a continuation of one or a new take on the original one or whatever. So we could have that conversation, but essentially, when you get right down to it, you were watching a man put a woman through a whole lot of abuse. And there are a lot of people who said, we should stop producing that play. We should stop, glorifying this thing that is actually quite problematic. I think that is an argument. That is definitely an argument worth making and worth listening to and worth going through. But I've always come at it as, well, wait a minute. But it is the reason the play exists because it said something about the time and about that society. And even though it is 400 years old, we still kept that play alive, right? There are lots of plays from Shakespeare's period that we don't have, and yet we have this one. So what does that say about us in our literary heritage? That we've kept this playwright and plays. Taming's not the only one. Let's look at it and see what it continues to say about a particular period of time, right? Or what it could say. What I always try to remind people is that Shakespeare's works, we think of them as canon and traditional. They're experimental. None of them were, they're not new now, but there was no standard back then. So there's a whole lot of experimentation happening, and let's ask some questions and see what happens. And this production is an experiment. I think our director would say so. I'm going to shout her out because I see her in the crowd. Our assistant director, Rebecca Brunson's in the crowd. So, it is an experiment. We have a cast. It is a cast of 11 actors, 10 of whom are women or are non-binary, femme presenting, and 1 man. And what the director has decided to do, and I'm not giving away the story in saying this, everybody forgets that there is an induction. I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people forget that the play begins with an induction that says, a play is being put on for this guy, Christopher Sly. So what the director said was, let's beef up that induction, and let's see what happens if we actually work within this frame. So if you think of this proscenium, put another proscenium on the play. And what's happening is these women are saying, hey Sly, come play this character. There are some shenanigans that is going around it, but come play this character. We have this character we need to fill, come play this character. And essentially, come live this life for about 2 hours. And then let's see how you feel about it at the end. Let's see if you change at the end because you had to have a different experience. And I think we can talk about whether or not you can really ever empathize with someone else. I think that there's a discussion there to be had that is nuanced and subtle and with lots of gray space, but all of us we go to the theater for lots of reasons, but I think one of the reasons we go is to feel something and to experience something. And I think those of us who do theater, I think we do it with the hope of maybe learning or knowing something new that we didn't know before, whether it's about ourselves or about the character we just played, a character who might actually resonate very loudly with somebody who's in the audience. And so I think that is why we're doing that play. And the one thing I will say is, in terms of casting, if you've seen the head shop board, our Christopher Sly is a white man, and our host / Trukio is a black woman. And I take no credit for this, but I remember sitting in conversation and being like, that says something to see that relationship play out, right? And how powerful might that be? We have no idea if it will work. Y'all will make that decision for us, right? But there is a troupe of actors, there's a company of actors and designers and artists who really sat down and are like, okay, let's put this conversation out there in the world and let's hope people have it. And I'm really excited about that. Dawn, see that hand, thoughts?
Yes.
For Fat Ham, right, looking at the story of Hamlet, I think one of the things that I really like about Shakespeare, and I am speaking in draft, I'm like, do I like Shakespeare? Like that's always, every time we were just talking about it, I'm like, do I? No, I don't. Yes, I do.
It's not your conversation.
Pulling you back in because you can mess with it, right? You can, because we have so much distance, we can actually come to it through different lenses. So Fat Ham, right, this storytelling is of a queer black man, right, sensitive, trying to deal with the death of his father and the very quick remarriage of his brother, and what all of that entails, and how can he go through, he is going through his own existential crisis on top of existential crisis on top of existential crisis. And there's a freedom, and I think there's a freedom in taking Shakespeare and being able to sort of like say, okay, let's examine this with the lens of 2023 or whenever you are attacking it, right? And I think James Imes, the playwright, just very astutely is like, right, I got my way in, right? We're always asking like, what's my way into this play? How do I, right, identity and joy. And right, one of the thesis statements that we keep talking about, like what if you actually tried to live a life of pleasure instead of making yourself miserable for other people? What if you, right, followed your bliss? And like all of that, I don't know how he is packed it in there, but like he has mined that from this story that, right, we have come to know. And I think, I'm gonna make a gross generalization, but right, Hamlet, you're like, it's that brooding guy that's kind of whiny about, again, his dad dying, and mom marrying his brother. I mean, yeah, I hear it when I say it, I hear it, it's wrong. But also he's such a whiny brat about it. And who knew that there was more? That there was more to find in that. And again, I was being like super grossly reductive, so everybody out there that's like, it's about more than that. Absolutely. But even still, putting that like queer black lens, which also I think is a lens that like, who you could not have told me, let's say when I came online, like maybe in 1980, and by online I'm like, I can start thinking real thoughts. Like, I never would have thought, oh, Shakespeare, I will see myself in this on the regular, right? I will see my friends and their stories reflected in this on the regular. And so that's a little bit of like the magic that I think is at hand.
Yeah, it's just a fun play. It's just fun. I was saying backstage, it's the most joyful rehearsal room that I've been in ever, which is like, just the joy, the love that's in the rehearsal room is I'm excited to talk about, cook a thing that when people come to your house to eat, they taste everything you put in the meal. Not just the cumin or the garlic, but they also taste like the music you were playing when you were making it. And they taste whether or not you were having a bad day and you did the grocery shopping, whether or not you picked like the onion that was perfect or the one that looked like it had been dropped. Like it tastes everything. And so I'm really excited for audiences to taste just how joyful this play is, especially with a play like Hamlet, which I feel like Don was saying, has this kind of reputation for being this very serious thing. It's my least favorite Shakespeare. Yeah, it is. for that same reason, it's like the Beyonce of the canon, right? It's like I have to come out of the closet as a Beyonce fan because everybody it's like Beyonce. It's like I don't even have a choice to decide how I feel about this luminary artist. And that's how I feel about Hamlet. I didn't even get a choice. I was just told that it's like the greatest thing ever written, right? And what about Love Flavors Lost? Or what about right? But James has done such a wonderful job of actually liberating Hamlet from its stale, kind of souped up connotation so that people can approach it. I think that if you love Shakespeare, you're going to freaking die during this play because you can tell that James loves Shakespeare. So it's so witty, it's full of puns, it really really like honors the dramatic structure of the text until it completely doesn't. And even in like divorcing itself from it, it's still kind of homaging what the play could do. What it does for the women characters, it's just like, oh my God, I'm just butter, I just melt on the floor, because it's like these women who are kind of arrested in Shakespeare's language, like take center stage and liberate themselves and decide to be like their own authors in this way. I don't know how James was able to write them, but he did it so brilliantly, and that's something I'm really excited about. But yeah, I think and for people who don't love Shakespeare, like Shakespeare keeps tricking me into loving him. You know, like I was like, oh, whatever, and I like reading, I'm like, this shit is good. Like it's so muscular, you just get to masticate on like language, and it's so like visceral, and the characters really are the language, and when you really are doing the language, all of a sudden it's like full-on possession. I grew up in the Southern Black Church, and so like I love like reading the Old and New Testament. And for me, when I didn't read Shakespeare until college, grad school even, because I majored in, I thought I was going to law school, I majored in political science and social work. And so I didn't read Shakespeare until grad school. And I always had this, like I avoided it in high school, the one Romeo and Juliet that we had to read, I like avoided it. I like Spark Noted the thing. But because I grew up in the Black Southern Church, you know, you listen to the Old Testament be read, and it's so colorful. It's so rich. And the way that like a pastor from the East Coast delivers it versus, you know, a woman who's like opening up her church for the first time in the Deep South, like depending on how, you know, depending on where you are on the socioeconomic, educational, how you read the scripture, it's different. And like Shakespeare has this, right? And it's like, that's what like, that metric, like, I learned to kind of like not like it. I'm like, yeah, it sounds like the Bible, only people don't have fun with it. You know, and so it's like, but then like when you find those really wonderful productions of Shakespeare where people are like, the pentameter is only there to like, be like, it's actually like a guardrail to keep you from like railing off of the fucking side of the sharp turn, right?
Sometimes it takes you off the cliff anyway.
Yes. So I like Hamlet now.
I think the reason, I love that you said that because like, so I'm not a religious person, but I also love reading the Old Testament. In fact, I teach at the college and high school level, and oftentimes I'll be like, go read the King James version of this. And the students are like, why are you making me read this? It's like, this English is like terrible. And I'm like, I know, it is, but read it. There's a reason why I'm asking you to read it. And it's that literariness that's in that version. And there are lots of versions of the Bible that are like that. But I think the other thing is that like, we seek to standardize language every chance we get. There was no real standardization at that time. That's why you can find 3 different ways to spell Shakespeare. Right? There's Shakespeare, you know, Shakespeare.
I like that one.
Right. Like, because there was no standardization. So like there's this way that like the language, the play that's in the language is because let's figure this out. Like they're learning what is this industry? Like there's theater before Shakespeare. But the industry that we know today of people going to the Globe and buying a ticket for the Globe and the people say, like that, they were making that up as they went. And you can see the thing happening in the language as well. So that play of like figuring out how to articulate the self when you're learning how to articulate. Because you're maybe making it up as you go, right? How many words has Shakespeare created that we now use in the English language and phrases? It was a game, like it wasn't a game, but it was, like we say in the theater all the time, let's play. Yeah. That's what they were doing. And so I think like and that's why I love Shakespeare, because you can still feel that like energy of it. And I think why I hated it in high school, I hated Hamlet in high school, was because my teacher, she was lovely, but she was trying to standardize something that didn't need any gates and didn't need any walls and like structure. Like the whole point, the play's a mess. If you read Hamlet, I don't care which version you read, it is a mess. It's like, did you know what you were doing? Like,
you go out behind the curtain.
Exactly. You're like wondering, did you make a decision in Act 1 and then just say, screw that, and decide for something else in Act 4? Like, it is an absolute mess of a play, and yet, it is now my favorite. And every time I read it, it's new and it's different and I learn something, and every time I see it, I wasn't in the UK, so I had to watch it on like, you know, the NT Live. I watched the Benedict Cumberbatch Hamlet like 3 times. I saw it at the Paramount, I saw it at the Coolidge, and then I like saw it again when I got my NT Live account, and every time I learned something new. I learned something new about Gertrude watching that production.
It's Lear for me.
It's Lear, more about why Lear?
I'm not even gonna start.
That's the next one, y'all.
It's actually hard. Titus Andronicus too. That's a very
Is he a mother?
juicy play. Jesus. Anyway, I'm sorry. But yeah, it's Titus Andronicus. I did I think it's King Lear for me in 20, I think it was 2017, 2018. I was working at the Public. Oscar Eustis had put on the Shakespeare in the Park production of Julius Caesar, the like one that was like heard around the world, like Donald Trump had just been elected, and Greg Henry, cast Greg Henry is this like Trump-like character, and there's protests in the Demo Court, like Central Park, and we didn't know if we were going to open every night because people were so polarized by the production. And at the end of it, there was Lucas Caleb Rooney is an actor, a Broadway actor, who runs an organization called, he doesn't run it, the part of an organization called Zara Aina, which translates to Share Life, and it's based in Madagascar. And he's like, this is the first Shakespeare play I've ever directed. He's like, do you want to direct a Shakespeare with me in Madagascar this summer? I'm like, yeah. I was like, I love Shakespeare. So, we go to Madagascar. I don't speak a lick of Malagasy, which is this really beautiful, like, it's kind of like, it's a French, they were colonized by the French at one point, so it's like a dialect of French, but it's like also very African, South African, French kind of like fusion, and it's beautiful language, Malagasy. And so I spent 3 months in Madagascar adapting King Lear into Malagasy, and had to learn these characters. And then we took it on this national tour. We went all over it's an island, it's a country, the country of Madagascar. And I learned, I met Shakespeare. I felt like I met Shakespeare there. And I learned that the metric of it, that it even translates into, I can, even without knowing like line for line what the actors were saying, the metric, the meter, the rhythm of the verse, that's when I was like, oh, there's something to this. That is actually kind of, it's a dirty word for it. Universal. You know, and I feel like, and I use that word strategically because I feel like we have to take that word back. We artists have a responsibility. That word, the single verse, the singularity, that yes, we all might worship at different places, mosques, different tabernacles, whatever. We might all be from different places and have different things, but there is something that connects us, that makes us all uniquely similar. And it was there that I learned, I was like, oh, there's something universal about this, the way that Shakespeare has crafted the human being, that you can do it in Waco, Texas, you can do it at the Demo Court in New York City, you can do it on the side of a mountain in Madagascar, and the stories will resonate. But I think we should take that word back. We can't leave it to the people who are using it as a weapon to divide us. We have to, our job as artists, Anna Devere Smith talks about the theater being the last frontier of human experimentation, that our job is to be constantly fighting for that word, for us to see ourselves reflected in the other, and allow the other to see themselves reflected in us, so that we can learn to live on this burning, sinking, swelling rock together. I don't even know what I'm saying.
No, but it's all true though, and I think there's something important about that. So I think as a Black queer woman who has distanced herself from Shakespeare because of the lack of connection, similarity, I love being able to hear this conversation. So I'm like, oh, there is a way. There is a way in. And I remember when I got to see Fat Ham at the Public, and it shook my core. And it was, when they did it at the Public, it was so intimate. I was so close to the actors, and it was something I was like, wow. So Shakespeare can be for everyone in this way. And it was the first time that I felt that I could be seen in a Shakespeare show, that I could see my story, my family, represented accurately and know those people, and I was like, oh, we have to do Fat Ham. And I think those are the things that are so exciting about Fat Ham and the way Teams of Shrew is being produced here, is that we're getting an opportunity to see it in a way that I don't think anyone's ever dreamed of, or if they have dreamed of, they haven't had an opportunity to make it come to life. And now we get that opportunity, and I think it's so beautiful, and I'm so excited for more of it, which leads me into my next question, which is, with Fat Ham and Teams of Shrew taking these classic texts into a whole other world, what are your hopes for audiences when they see the shows and their like desire to see more theater?
What are my hopes for audiences? And I think for both audiences, what I would hope, right, is that excitement. Again, it's everything that we've been saying. The excitement of coming in and looking at, okay, these are the bodies that are telling these stories, and they are different and the same, and they are, right, like they are people that I know, and they're people that I don't, and like, what is that? To like have sort of these worlds blown up a little bit with who can come in and who are we used to telling these stories, or who are we used to being the physical bodies on stage. So one, I hope people get really excited by that. Two, I mean, at the end of the day, right, I haven't seen your show yet, but I know this company very well, and your Shakespeare project, and so, right, like I think between y'all, between what we're doing, I'm like, it's gonna be a good time. You have to just come and have a good time, and know that you can have a good time with Shakespeare's text, which I think, again, like that's not a thing that you learn until you learn it. Like you don't know it until you have that one experience where you're like, oh, this is actually accessible, there is something here. So like again, like I think first, for me, one of those first times that I went to see, or that I interacted with Shakespeare was a very stuffy Romeo and Juliet. And then you see the Scottish play in like a what was it, like a bomb shelter. It was like a bomb shelter in a library. And you're like, what is this? How can it be like this? And then the next thing you know, you're like, oh, Hamlet. In my backyard at my family picnic. That's a little weird. Okay, no, this tracks.
With karaoke.
Right here, karaoke.
Yes.
And here we are in a club and they smoke. There's that old
70s. It's a 70s club. There's a cigarette
machine.
That's it. I don't know if it works, but
It does.
oh, it does.
Sick. So we'll know who's been going.
It's all of that. Those little things that you're like, wait, it doesn't have to be the thing that has always been presented to me, or the thing that I think has always been presented to me. Because I think we've actually been blowing up Shakespeare. We've been doing more and experimenting with it for quite some time. But there is still, I think, this wall and this perception that you don't move past until you move past. So my hope is that like people come to see these shows and they're like, there's more. There's more.
I'll answer this by saying, I only sort of remember what the actual question is, Pascale. Can you tell me what it is?
Yes, the question is, what are your hopes for audience when they see this play and their desire for theater?
So actually, I want to answer this, right? Like, I saw Fat Ham on Broadway because I couldn't make it to the public. So when it was on Broadway, I went back in March and was like, my birthday present to myself is I'm going to New York and I'm seeing a play because it's my favorite, right? And I was like, and I am utterly fascinated by adaptations because I'm always interested in like, how is a person trying to rewire something so that it speaks to the people that who are actually going to see it, as opposed to just like, well, this was written in like 1603. Yeah, 1603, I think. And how does it speak then, right? Like and I kind of knew a little bit about Fat Ham because it started at the Wilma, and I remember being like, ooh, but I can't go to Pennsylvania. And it was at the public, and I was like, can't make it to the public, and so I saw it on Broadway. So I was like, knew something was happening, but I was like, but is it still the same play? And while I went with my friend, and he hadn't known anything about it, and so even though I had some context, he had none. And I just remember watching him watch the play, and he watched it like, and then when it was over, he like, everybody shot up, and he was just like,
That is what you want.
and just like, he couldn't handle it. And meanwhile, I was like, I was obnoxious. And I went, the night that I went was like Black Broadway night or something. And it ended up actually being one of like the best nights of my life, because I met Audrey Holland afterwards. He was there. And I saw him play Othello in the Globe, and I was just like,
Yes.
this is like the best night of my life. But I just remember like that 90 minutes being so joyful and jubilant. And the reaction from the crowd, like, I often like to watch an audience when I'm sitting in an audience, because I think that tells you actually so much about what's happening on stage. And the audience could not help but react, right? Like, out loud. Like, oh girl, what? Like, what? And that doesn't happen because, like, you know, and I think in Boston it can feel like this. To go to the theater is a polite, cultured activity.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but it's not. Like, you know, for the Greeks it was meant to be cathartic, which meant if you don't come out of it having felt something, having had some reaction that is released, the thing didn't work, right? And if you like go to like the open air theaters in the UK, like thinking of like Shakespeare's time, they were drinking, eating, you're hoping you're like not getting your pocket picked by somebody in the crowd while you're too busy laughing at God knows what's happening on stage, and you know, fights might break out. It was rowdy and it was raucous and it was alive and present, and there's energy there. So to be in a space, even it wasn't intimate, and I wish I could have been in the intimate version of it.
Girl knows everything.
Yeah, but that space, it just felt so electric and so bright and alive, and even though like it kind of struck my friend a little dumb for a minute, but also that's good too, right? Like to be just gobsmacked by something that is so buoyant and smart. I mean, that was the other thing for me, because I know the play so well. I can't have nice things. I go to the theater and I'm like, what are you gonna do now? Where's the to be or not to be speech? Right? Yeah, like how are we gonna kill Polonius? Like I'm like waiting for all the things. And then it happened and I was like, fucking James Eyes. Damn! Like it was so good. And I remember being like, because like I said, it was a really great night, so afterwards I actually met him. And the first thing I said to him was, thank you. You managed to create something brand spanking new, but it's still the thing that I know and love so well, and that is amazing. And I'm so grateful. And that's what I hope. Not every audience member is going to have that experience, right? But no, but I hope for it. I hope for that. Like even if you never knew it, just because I didn't know that. Even if you don't love it, but if you have something where I didn't know that this could be a thing to engage with or to like grapple with. Like that's what I would love for audiences to see either of these productions.
Yeah, I think benediction. You know, I like to describe the theater as the church in the wild. Growing up, there were so many things I couldn't do in church. And I hate when theater feels like that. It shouldn't be a place where it's like you can't do things, right? Anything should be allowed. I like theater to feel like a football game. Right? Like you're cheering for your team determines whether or not they score that goal, right? And I really try to create theatrical experiences where that's possible. You know, Ain't No Mo is probably the most successful example of that. Where, you know, Jesus, I'll never forget closing night of Ain't No Mo. And like people standing like all the way out to the lobby, screaming at the stage. Just Peaches is like scanning people in to take their Revelations flight. God will never forget that. And it's like, and that Ham has that feeling too. That feeling of like you're supposed to talk back to the stage. But I think that benediction of like all the characters in this play have to come out of something. It's actually it's tricky because it feels like it's a coming out story for everyone but the gayest character. Everyone else has to come out. His mother has to predetermined idea of femininity and just like, you know, when you become a mom, like that's a designation, right? It swallows up everything. When you become a wife, it can swallow up everything. And so you watch this woman have to come out of that idea. You watch this young woman have to come out of the idea that her mother has prescribed for her. You watch this hyper-masculine man have to come out of this, like everyone's coming out of something. And I think that like, if we did get this right, the audience will get that kind of benediction. They'll look at these characters and say, oh, I have so much stuff I have to come out of. You know, whatever that is. Whether it's like my hyper-intellectualism, like from Boston. Or whether it's from like when it goes down to Atlanta, like the hyper-Christianity, right? Like everybody has something that they have to come out of, and these characters are perfect mirrors for that. And the other thing that I hope people get, I'm just gonna keep saying it, I hope that people get the universality of this play. Like, I'm gonna take that word back. James, the thing that makes it so successful is that James loves Shakespeare. You feel it. That's why he loved it. But he also loves Black people.
Yes.
And you feel that too. And the thing, and then you can extend that. There's nothing more universal than a backyard barbecue. At first I was like, there's nothing more Black than a backyard barbecue. And I was like, oh, that's not it. There's nothing more American than a backyard barbecue. And I was like, oh, that's not even big enough. There's nothing more human than a group of people gathering around a fire, roasting some greasy, good food, drinking too much, and almost killing each other. There's nothing more human than that. And I think that, like, so when I say James loves Shakespeare, James loves Black people, James loves the human experience, right? Which is what Shakespeare captures so well. And so I hope that people really, really get that. And I'm gonna say one other thing that's really dirty.
Please. Ooh, yes.
I got this idea, right? I have this, people always push back, oh, watch, I'm ready for this. I think that Tyler Perry is the Shakespeare.
Say it.
And let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. You will. Listen. I'm gonna teach you something back. You talk about like the origin of Shakespeare, and people are standing in their seats, and they're drunk, and there's pickpocketers, and you know someone's eating a chicken sandwich. How many of you, show of hands, have been to a live Tyler Perry play? That is what happens when you go to a Tyler Perry play. It's like, regardless of how you feel about the literary merit of what's happening on that stage, regardless of how you feel about that, if you ever get a chance, he doesn't really tour plays much anymore, but if you ever get a chance, go for the soul experience of being in an audience with people who have the theater etiquette. If you sit here and you're like, ah! That is bad theater etiquette in a Tyler Perry play. Yeah. And I think in this moment when we're trying to figure out, I'm in my artistic director bag, we're trying to figure out how do we curate new audiences? How do we develop things that are exciting to people? We should all be trying to take a leaf out of this man's playbook because he's created something that is so infectious when you're sitting in the audience. It's so, no, you can't fall asleep in one of those plays. No. You don't even want to go to the bathroom, and sometimes they're like 4 hours. But you sit through the whole play, and so despite how you feel about the literary merit of what he does, I think that he has electricity in a bottle when it comes to audience interaction. Feeling like you're at a WCW wrestling match, that's what I want.
Okay, so I hear that. And what I will say is, I think the thing that, to me, it sounds like the thing you're reacting to, which Tyler Perry does, which I think, I just said Shakespeare does, or anybody actually writing in that period, probably was able to do, because just of the nature of theater going. So you keep saying universal. I often say I don't believe in the myth of universality. To me, it is a weapon of white supremacy. What I do believe in, though, is I'm using the word commonality, but it's not even the word that I mean. What happens is a recognition, right? When we go to the theater and it resonates with us, It's because we recognize something. It might not be exactly the same, like a reflection is not 100% exactly what the thing that it is, right? But you recognize enough of it to say, I know that. And I think that's what we respond to when we're saying universal in Shakespeare. That's not what it is, which is the thing that we recognize that we're responding to. And I think that's what Tyler Perry does, right? I have never been to a live Tyler Perry play, but before he had TV shows, I saw the DVD.
Yes, the DVD.
And I will always say, am I a Tyler Perry fan today? No, but I would always say, I much rather his plays.
Yes.
And the reason I felt that way was because there was something recognizable in those characters on that, and I think it was because it was a play,
Right.
as opposed to film or TV. I was like, is that my family? No. But do I recognize them?
Absolutely.
Yes, because my family's not from the South. My family's Haitian.
Right.
So a lot of that stuff I heard in Haitian Creole,
Right.
right? Or French, and with all sorts of different like spices and flavoring. But I recognized it, and I was like, and that is why, like, you know, I can maybe like have like. I'm on this stage right now with somebody who's from the South, right? I'm having this conversation from different angles, but somehow yet meeting in the middle.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, right? That I think that I always want to push is like if you want to call it universal because that's the word that makes sense, that's one thing. But I think the thing that's actually happening is deeper than that and much more complicated. It's recognition. And the question is, why do I recognize something that I've never experienced before?
Right.
And that's the magic of it, right? Like how do you capture that thing that even though you've never seen it or never heard it, once you see it or hear it, you kind of know what it is enough to want to make it your own. And I think that's what's powerful about the stuff.
I can get down with the kind of demarcation of thought and like how I think when I say universal, I think about that the word if I broke it into a single verse, right? Like that we like, and for me the recognition is that I share this with you. I share some of that experience with you, whether or not like that's Haitian or South African or South, like deep South America, right? Like that there are some things that like I share this with you, right? Like, and I think that like that, it's like on the largest sense when I use that word universal, it's that idea that we share, the reality is that we do share the universe. We actually share the entire universe. It is collectively ours, and we are not doing a good job sharing it. But it is ours to share. It is ours to share. I think about that Baldwin quote when he talks about, and I'm going to butcher it, but he talks about, you know, you think that your experience is so special, that your experience is all yours. And then you get into the world and you realize that your experience is reflected in so many other tongues, in so many other colors, in so many other places, in so many other times, that there is actually nothing new under the sun. It's what Whitman describes as the old forever new things. That we share the old forever new things. And it's not meant to discard all of the nuance of your culture, of my culture, our collect like individual cultures. But it's to remind us that we have a responsibility to what we share. But yeah, and I do say Tyler Perry is this generation's Shakespeare. It is meant to be provocative.
As he wants to, as Shakespeare was.
It's meant to make you say, wait up.
I know. I'm like, now I gotta be like an elitist New England city.
We all have those things. Right. All of us were like, I don't know if I like Shakespeare, now you like Shakespeare. It's real. Wait till you turn the corner.
I can't wait.
What if this plays the thing that's about?
That's true.
Because the thing that's popular is the thing that survives.
Well, I mean, Shakespeare technically wasn't the most popular playwright.
No,
That's something that happened in the 1800s,
Right.
well after he did his work, right?
So all of those folks are like, this guy?
Yeah.
They're all still doing this?
Yep. But yeah, that's our feature basically.
I will tell you what is universal though. I can get behind this one thing. Everybody will happily sit around the fire, eating good food, telling stories. Right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that is why Fat Ham works.
Mhm.
And the best thing I ever heard about Hamlet was, it's a ghost story.
Yeah, it is. It
What,
is.
and how
That's
you
the
listen to a
first
ghost story, you
scene.
sit around a fire, and you like tell a story, you might have some food. Like the first scene we see Hamlet, it's
Yeah.
a feast,
Yeah.
right? It's where you sit there. Like everybody, that is universal. Storytelling is universal, and eating good food.
You know what it is?
And drinking good drink.
I begin to practice Buddhism. I'm practicing Buddhism. I'm very young in my journey on the path. I was raised Christian, but I'm cultured, and I'm still culturally Christian because Jesus is also a stalker. And I'll put it that way. I'll put it that way. But it's the Buddhism that really like helps me to my job is to work. I think that in this political climate, I think that as newspapers are under attack and local news reporting is under attack, and we live in these silos and we have our news on our phone, it's only what we like, and there's so much confirmation bias. I think that it's our job as the artists to be fighting hard to see the other. And I know that's it's exhausting and it's bullshit. But it's also the only reason we do what we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no other reason to. I don't think we don't get paid enough to do it.
So I don't remember if I said, I am also an actor.
Yes.
And I often tell people, I tell my students this actually. Your job as an actor is to prepare all the outfits. That's what you do. Make sure you've got all the outfits, you've got all the accessories, the shoes are there, you lay them all out, and then when it's time and the character is ready, they will come out and put on the right outfit. Your job is to just make sure it's ready, and you let them tell their story, right, and have their moment. And the reason I started saying that was because, well, first off, it's just really healthy to not try to therapize your demons out in a character. Like, as much as, that sexual line of demarcation is actually really helpful just for your own sanity and self and well-being. But also because, yes, it's a character, yes, they technically don't exist, but they're people, and they're people who have lives to live and things to say, and it is important to let them live their lives and say their words. And if the only way that can happen is through me, well, then that's my job in that moment. And that is how you see the other, right? Like it's not so much that it's not that it's about me, but that maybe I can be helpful to that other to help them feel, to help them be in a way that feels good and safe.
And then learn
that makes
more
no
about
sense,
yourself.
right? And in the process, if I'm so lucky, I learn more about myself, right? I don't know if that made any sense.
No, it totally did. It all made sense. Please, these are amazing people who have brilliant minds. All of it amazing. So, I'd love to switch gears, and we're going to open it up to Q&A. We have a mic going around. We have hands. I will say this. I'm going to leave, unfortunately, because I have a preview of my first show tonight. Come see Ham and Taming of the Shrew and Midsummer kind of here later in October. And we'll start with our first question. Go ahead.
Hi, how's it going? Thank you all very much. I walked in late, so I didn't get the pronunciation of your name. Regine, am I saying that right?
Regine, yes.
Regine. Thank you so much, Regine. I'm also from Somerville, so I'd love to see you here on this stage. I'm really excited to see Taming of the Shrew. And I wanted to ask you about, you alluded a little bit to this, that Shakespeare is this really live, raucous, audience experience thing that became this standardized, text thing. And I wondered, one, how you find the balance between that audience experience, that just the staging, being in presence with each other, and also finding beauty in rich text.
I think that in terms of the audience part, I think this is true. I think this is true of all theater. So, for example, if you're doing a play that's only got 2 people in it, really there are 3 people in it. There are the 2 actors on stage and the audience, right? If you pretend like they're not there, like they're just watching you behind a glass window, you're not. I personally feel you're not fully doing the play, right? because whether or not you acknowledge their reactions are going to do things to you as an actor that you will then bring to that character, right? So like, so I always say that no matter what. But when doing Shakespeare, I'm like, talk to the audience. Pick a person, look them in the eye, and say the thing to them. Whether it's a soliloquy or it's a random line and not a soliloquy. Because it's not only is it just there, and it makes no sense to not bring them into the fold, I think it's built into the play, right? Again, Rebecca and this crew of folks who are here, they will know this. I did a workshop with them where I'm like, the idea of like, there's this idea of when, in the period, if you go to see a play, it will infect you. So if you see something sinful on stage, it will infect you through the eyes, and you will go and do something sinful out in the world. And that's why, you know, there are people who say, shut down the theaters, it is an abomination, right? It's breeding all these sinners. I'm paraphrasing. And I'm like, but like the reason I do this workshop with them, this is at Commonwealth Shakespeare Company with their apprentice program, the reason I do it is because people actually know that still happens. If you see something and you cry, whether it's because you're sad or you're happy, the thing you just saw on stage affected you. It doesn't work unless you are affected. So you have to have the audience in the process with you, in the moment with you, if it's actually going to happen. And then with the text, like, you know, some people, at the end of the day, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But for me, you know, I do a lot of things, right? Like, I direct, I dramaturg, I act. I'm also an educator. I teach literature and composition. And I always say, what I really work in is language. I just love words. I don't care what the word is. I just love words. I love how they work. I love how they sound. I love how they do things to people, whether you understand what the word means or not. You know, like, it's like what you were talking about in Madagascar, like, even if you don't know what the actual words are saying, there's something about the rhythm, about its cadence, about its tempo and its pacing, that speaks, right? It's like music. And so for me, whenever I'm working with text, I like to find, where's the music? Where's the melody? Where's the beat? What are the harmonies? Does it change key? Right? Is there a key change? Like, and what does that say? Which is, for me, a bit of an affective response. And from there, I make it make sense. And I think Shakespeare just does that. Like you don't have to, I don't know that you necessarily need to know what it's saying. I think you just need to know that you are, number one, included. And number two, if you can feel it, ride that wave. And that's it. You've done it, right? Like, so that's how I approach it.
I've got to see your work.
We have another question.
Hi, Gabriel with GBH Forum Network. We have a question on the Zoom webinar. Did Shakespeare ever invite any people of color, especially from the African diaspora, to be cast members in his plays during his lifetime or shortly thereafter in Great Britain? Any thoughts on that?
Oh God, what's that mean?
That's you.
So what I will say is this, having studied some Shakespeare and some history of the period, I don't know that I can say a categorical yes to that. What I can say is, we know that there's, like, so if you know you're in London, there would have been people of color in London. So there would have likely been people of color at the theater in London, right? So whether or not they were, I don't know if they were on stage performing necessarily. Like, I personally do not know what all the background is of all the actors who were in the King's Company or the Chamberlain's Men or whatever, the King's Men. But we know that there would have been people of color, and not just because he features them in his plays, right? We know that during the Elizabethan monarchy, like Ethiopia sent an ambassador. I'm assuming the ambassador from Ethiopia was a black man, right? And he would have had his entourage come with him, right? We know that there's this great book, if you're into it, it's called Black Lives in the English Archives by Imtiaz Habib. And basically what he did was he went around going through archival papers, I want to say maybe between like 1550 and 1700 or so, and just looking like in like death records, birth records, marriage licenses, people of color who would have been registered in places all over England. And one of the things that I think he found was this, like, Elizabeth was gifted two little Blackens, right, by one of her many, like, pirates who were on the high seas or whatever. And so we know that they were at court. We know that they were probably in the towns because merchants would have likely had Black people working in their homes, either as their property or whatever. So ostensibly, there were Black people in the audience, at least. Now, whether or not they were brought up on stage in some capacity, I personally don't know. There may be research going on about that. But also, why not? All right, I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's I'm a bad historian.
We have another question here.
So I absolutely love this. Theater has, in the U.S., been traditionally white. Looking at it with a lens of the Black theater and opportunities there, my question is, what happens to people that are Asian and to Cuban and Latin, and how do we get to where theater is more integrated and it doesn't matter what color you are?
I think I love to like just challenge a little bit in perspective and say that theater in America has not been traditionally white. No, I think that the institutions that have been resourced and have been designated as houses of art and given governmental support, private backing, and that those have been traditionally historically white places. But again, like growing up in a neighborhood where we didn't have a form of theater, I founded one in 2012. But we, in my neighborhood, there was always theater, whether or not that was happening in a church Sunday morning worship, or in a school gymnasium, that are at a PTO, a PTA, that there's always been people coming around the fire to tell stories and performing those stories. Like, and that happens in Cuban American neighborhoods, it happens in Mexican American neighborhoods, it happens in Jewish neighborhoods, it happens in every neighborhood you can imagine. And so I think that the problem that we're facing right now is a part, for a long time, this thing called the Chitlin Circuit, right? Which is like, I've done a lot of research around that. And my interest in Shakespeare, the Titus Andronicus is something I've been working on a paper for way too many years about did Shakespeare, ask the question, did Shakespeare create the Black Boogeyman with Aaron the Moor, whose last line in that play is that if I've done anything virtuous, let me be forgiven for it. That he's this like truly villainous character. But that's his tangent. But is Shakespeare, has Shakespeare been used like a lot of religions as a colonial tool to educate? Absolutely. We can't talk about Shakespeare and culture without talking about the implications of race and its historical placement, right, in society. It would be irresponsible. That's a whole other conversation too. I just want to like lift up that question that was on the Zoom. But speaking to that, how do we get to the place where our theaters are diverse? It's the same question. It goes back to what Anna DeVere Smith said. What I keep going back to is this idea of us seeing each other, fighting to see each other. Because this problem is not uniquely theatrical. It's not the problem with the thespian. It's a deep need. It's again a fucking universal problem. Because the whole country, the whole world was colonized. The whole world was cut by powers. So when we go into the theater and we see that it's not as racially diverse, it also happens in neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are decimated by gentrification. You know, that also happens in churches. I read an article a long time ago that 11 a.m. is the most segregated hour in America. On Sunday morning at 11 a.m., people, it's like, we even worship. You know, like if you Black, your Jesus got dreadlocks. If you White, got blue eyes. Right? Like that, like you know, that we're divided even in how we understand the cosmos. Which is like, I don't know the answer to that. I think Zora Neale Hurston says there are the years that ask the questions then there are the years to answer. I'm determined to be among the generation of people who try to answer that question. And I think that Ham is a great example of that, of us attempting to answer that, but does it go far enough? Does even Fat Ham go far enough? Should, maybe there's a Hamlet that's being re-envisioned that is as diverse as the world that we live in. Maybe it doesn't even use Shakespeare as a source text, because it's steeped in, as brilliant as it is, it's still steeped in there's colonial residue on it, right? So I don't know, but I think that asking the question is so important, and I think that we have a responsibility to try to come up with an answer together.
I know I'm talking too much, but if I could just add, I think that it, and I don't quite know how to, because I can't go into somebody's mind and heart and change it, but it does require having an open mind and heart to something looking and being different than what you thought it was, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the example I'll just give really quickly is in 2018-19, the Globe did a production of Richard II, which was all women of color. Adjoa Endo played Richard II. And it was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen, because it was all these different women of color from all over the place. And when I thought about it, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I think they all had traces back to places that would have been colonized by the Brits. Mm-hmm. And here's this play that's about power, being told by women. That's already a layer, right? And who have lineages to places that were colonized and under the umbrella of an empire, right? They used to say that the sun doesn't set on the British Empire. So if you go to see that play, right, I think you have to let yourself be open to, let me think about what power has looked like and what it has wrought, negative and positive, right? One of the positives maybe about the British Empire is that we get to talk about Shakespeare today. One of the negatives about power is that there are a lot of people who don't think Shakespeare actually speaks to them or is about them, or that Shakespeare has been used to denigrate and maybe take away from them the things that they have a right to be proud of in their own heritage, right? So how do you confront power in that sense? And then the flip side of that is, how do you rethink power when it's in the body and the voice of a woman? How do you rethink power when it's in the body and the voice of a brown person or an Asian person, right? And I think that requires an audience that is willing to say, everything I knew can be changed, and I need to allow for that possibility, which is hard to do. It's hard to decide, to say, I've been wrong, right? We know how hard it is to admit to being wrong. It's even harder to say that everything I know may not be right, or everything I know may actually be bad. I mean, this is why it's so hard to fight white supremacy, because if you tell somebody that, they feel that that as some sort of indictment on who they are and everything they ever were and know, right? And that's really hard to do, but I think if we can encourage that, and encourage audiences who will do that, I think that's the beginning, right? And that's why you go see Fat Ham and recognize it for the art that it is, even if you also acknowledge its lineage. But yeah, I think that's a way to begin. And then the simplest way I would say is I tell people all the time, Shakespeare's been dead for 400 years. You can impose yourself on the text. Yeah, Shakespeare.
Yes, in truth, we are all unified. There is this universal aspect that is ingrained within each of us. And how do we learn to see ourselves in one another and truly drop that egoic lens of individuality and separation? And I think the theater is a great way to do that. In any role that we take, in any project we choose to be a part of, I feel like, sometimes the text may not always, adhere to that, to the integration and inclusivity of us, but I feel like that's our job, to really try and do that. So really for you, Stevie, I love what you're saying, my friend. How do you integrate your own spiritual practice in the work you take?
Oh man, It's something I take so seriously because I think like, politicians, like they legislate, right? That's their job, is to legislate, right? It's to shift the rules, right? Rabbis or preachers, their job is to kind of try to shift the spiritual body. And it's like our job as the artists is to do the things that you're talking about. And I think about scientists, like people, they can clone chickens now. I feel like we as artists, our tools have to be updated. We're behind. The world is kind of waiting for, who is it that said, only the poets know? Someone said that, someone really smart, some dead poet. But that only the poets know. And it's like, it's time for us to update our tools because chickens are being cloned and legislation is being written. But we still have to figure out how to write stories, enough stories that evolve us into the next frontier of human connection, which is something I'm deeply interested in. I became interested in that in 2013. I lost one of my best friends. His name was Abel Winter. He was murdered by police officers outside of Dallas, Texas. He had just graduated from college, had got a corporate job. It was a Sunday off. He was riding a really nice bike he had just bought. And 3 cops opened up 100 yards away from him. They said he fit the description of someone, his college graduate, with a corporate degree, and his corporate job. He shot 3 cops. He lasted him away. He wasn't even 24. And I was at the New School for Drama, and I almost lost it the first time I left the country. It was the first time I ever left America. And I went to I applied for a travel grant. I ended up going to Johannesburg. And there I started, I became hyper-aware of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. Became obsessed with them. This idea that a government would set monies aside to try to not just restore justice, but to reconcile people who had both the transgressors and the people who were negatively impacted around like this historical atrocity that decades of resources were poured into this idea. One might argue that they failed or succeeded. The TRC's got its own complicated history. But I came back to America, and I started working for this place called the All-Stars Project on a program called Operation Compensation Cops for Kids. Because I carried for a year so much rage inside of me that it was destroying me. And I started using theater games, Augusta Boal. I trained as a joke. I spent 2 years training in theater request. And I wanted to see if it was possible to, at the time I was organizing the Black Lives Matter movement, I was doing a lot of work, and I felt like all of my protesting was so valuable, was not really directly impacting the kids that were being directly affected. That like, everyone was protesting with NYU students. They were church goers. They were people who could afford to like this work to go to protest. They weren't the people living in the nice housing in the neighborhood that I was living in Harlem. So I studied the TRC. I began to work on this thing called Operation Conversation that's housed out of the All-Stars Project that uses theater games to try to get cops to see the communities that they serve as human and to get the youth, the teenagers, to see the cops as also human. Because there's a problem of fear at that intersection. There's a deep problem of fear. It's a problem of training, for sure. That's also a problem of fear of the other, fear of the other's humanity, that causes a cop to erase a human being and causes another civilian to erase a cop if they don't have a uniform. And that became kind of the origin of this deeply spiritual practice of like working to see myself in the other and inviting others to see themselves in me because I needed to heal my rage. And so this thing of like, how do I do it? I really don't know. I wake up every day and I have so much isms. I have all the isms. I have every ism you can think of, all the horrible persons about me. But I work so hard to try to scrape out the gunk that's like been over-determined by society. I try to scrape that crap out of me and make myself a vessel that people can map themselves onto and look for God in other people. God in the broadest sense. And they help me to forgive Shakespeare. They help me to forgive a lot of things, studying the TRC. And I tell you, I have so many friends who worked as organizers at the BLM, and they say, do you really think that at that time, though, like, there's so much rage in our community, and still is, do you really think a theater game can save a child's life? And I say, all the time, if one cop delays for 2 seconds, pulling the trigger, and someone who doesn't look like them, or doesn't, because they played a theater game, then yeah, it's absolutely worth it. And that's the kind of hard legislation that works quicker than the Constitution. So.
But that doesn't mean you can't legislate love, right?
No. I'm really mindful. I feel bad because I'm talking so much, but I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I just try, man.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. So I'm Susan Spurlock. I'm the Executive Director of the Ward Hall Forum at Suffolk University. I want to thank you, Stevie, Regine, and Dawn, so very, very much for joining us here at Ward Hall Forum. My heart is full. Thank you for your humanity, for your contributions to the theater, to our world. I am deeply humbled. And I can't wait to see these productions. I'm going to be at Fat Ham at the end of the month. I'm going to be at the Taming of the Shrew on the 20th. I want to thank the audience for joining us tonight. We had a very, very robust Zoom crowd. We had over 50 people joining us, so thank you so much. We have someone joining us from Hawaii who says aloha. This person wished they could have been here, spends a lot of time in Boston, but says aloha. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to the audience. Get home safely. Thank you so much.